this is going to be a lot of walking. If you do not want to make the hike all the way over to the other side, by all means, after we leave this spot, if you want to get in your car and you want to drive around to the Harris's battery section, we'll eventually make it to that point. Because it's going to be a lot down that hill, up, down in those trees over there, up again, across over to where the Russell House is, and then back this way. So it's a lot of walking, and then Taylor's going to take us up and down those hills over there. So if you don't want to be doing all that walking, you can meet us on the other side, and we can get you filled in once we get over there to you. So we are going to be getting into General Wood's brigade, Sterling Alexander Martin Wood. Wood is, we don't really have a lot to say about him because he's not going to be involved here for too long. He's going to get hit pretty early on, but we'll get to that story here in just a little bit. But this is General Wood, Sterling Alexander Martin Wood, big long name. And then we have a picture here of his staff as well. He and his staff, just right here. So this is the man that's supposed to be in command here. But what we'll see here is that that's not really what happens. But so Wood commands the 4th Brigade in Buckner's 3rd Division, which is part of Hardee's left wing. They are going to begin at the Dye House. That's where their original position is. So when we're there this afternoon going over the artillery, they start off way over there. And then eventually they're going to make their way across kind of that area going that way. His brigade consists of 5 infantry regiments, a sharpshooter battalion, and then a couple sections of Semple's battery. But we're only going to be getting into a few of these regiments because not all of them are going to be engaged here. They're here, but they don't get into the actual fight. Kind of what happened was it the 44th Tennessee?
44th will come to, yeah.
Or the 25th?
Mostly 25th.
Yeah, so there's a lot of artillery support, and I think there's a lot of miscommunication because, well, we'll get to that in a second. But the brigade is made up of the 33rd Alabama, 32nd Mississippi, and then another Mississippi regiment that goes by 2 things. It's 33rd/45th. The designation for that particular regiment is always sort of hazy. They don't get the actual designation until much later. So sometimes on these maps and in the books about Perryville, you'll see them listed as the 33rd Mississippi. Some list them as the 45th. So to keep us from getting confused with the 33rd Alabama, I'll just call them the 45th today. That way there's a lot of 33s, 32s here, and so it's just a little, mix up the numbers a little more, it'd be a little easier. And then we also have the 15th Mississippi Sharpshooter Battalion, which is about 2 companies. So the brigade also has the 16th Alabama and the 3rd Confederate, but those are the 2 regiments that don't really play a huge role here. And you can really say they're hardly engaged at all. We do need to talk about the command structure that exists prior to the battle and then as it unfolds here. So throughout the Kentucky campaign, Wood is actually going to be in command of Buckner's division fairly often. Buckner is going to leave the division fairly often to go recruit, because being Kentuckian in Kentucky, trying to get these Kentucky men to enlist in the Confederate Army, which doesn't seem to work a whole lot. And whenever he's away from the division, Wood is the one that rises up and is the one that's in charge. Sometimes, while he is doing that, the command of the brigade falls to Colonel Mark Lowry of the 32nd Mississippi. And just before the battle, that's when Buckner returns to the Army, and Wood goes back down to the brigade, Lowry goes back down to his regiment. So, I mean, Wood was in command pretty much until the day before, and until Buckner shows up. But like we said, Wood is not going to be in command for long. Mark Lowry is going to be the one that steps in and leads the brigade for partial first part of the fight, and then he eventually gets hit too. So there's a lot of officers that get hit in this brigade, and so because of that, there is not a single report from that brigade at all. So no brigade report, no regimental reports. There's just too many high-ranking officers that get hit, and for some reason or another, never make any sort of report. So the primary sources we do have on this brigade are from some of just the enlisted men when they record some things in their diaries. There's some memoirs that they write later on in the war, and so we're going to be looking at some of those. All right, so a little bit of background on Wood. He is born March 17th, 1823 in Florence, Alabama, and he is 39 years old here at Perryville. And the more I get into a lot of these officers, the more I realize just how young a lot of them. I don't know if it's because I'm getting to that age too, and I don't feel that old, but it's like, these guys aren't that. Always, when I was younger, these guys always seemed so much older, and I guess not. And so I don't know if that's a good thing for me to think that or not. But anyways, he's only 39 here at Perryville. His father, which is interesting family here, his father was a veteran of the War of 1812, but on his mother's side, her father was a British officer during the Revolution. So I'll be interested to see how those family reunions were with a British officer, and so that's always an interesting thing. And so there is an Alabama regional history book from 1888, and they described him as one of the most splendid specimens of physical manhood in the military service of the Confederacy. And
I think John H. Morgan might have something to say about that.
he might, yeah. And then his record is not really so splendid.
So splendid.
Yeah, or not something you put up there with manhood either. But so yeah, it's something. So he was actually educated not too far from here. He was at Bardstown. He went to the Jesuit school that was there at the time. So I would imagine he's somewhat familiar with this area. Especially whenever the Confederate Army is sitting there at Bardstown for a while. And then he eventually practices law at Murfreesboro, then goes home to Florence where he joins his brother's law practice. In the 1850s, he is the solicitor of the 4th District Court. He serves a stint in the Alabama legislature and is the editor of the Florence Gazette in 1860. And then in 1861, with no previous military experience at all, Wood is going to be elected captain of Company K of the 7th Alabama. So he has zero experience at all. And then we're going to see he's going to be a general here by the fall of 1862. So it's quite the rise. The 7th Alabama, though, is one of these Pensacola regiments that was under General Bragg whenever he was serving down there. So it's a well-drilled outfit. But they eventually transferred to East Tennessee to help with the Unionist guerrilla problem that's erupting over there. Where Wood seems to think he's had some success in breaking up some of these Union camps that are there, and then eventually they get transferred to Bowling Green, where Wood becomes a brigade commander. So within a few months, he's newspaper editor, captain, and then colonel, and then eventually brigadier general within just a few months. At Shiloh, he leads his brigade, but he's out of action for several hours. Apparently, his horse drags him some distance. And he's got some minor injuries, and he misses some of the fight. This brings up some questions about his courage, I guess you could say. And there is a formal inquiry that is conducted, but they find no fault there of him, and so nothing comes of that. And so during the Kentucky campaign, he is leading the brigade here under Buckner's division. So for a man that has his only real battle experience has been at Shiloh, and then that was pretty brief. He's commanding another brigade here, which is also going to be brief. But a little bit about the brigade, though. Whenever they are getting to Perryville, I don't think they are in the best condition because his quartermaster, a man named Frank Gaylor, we'll talk more about later. He kept a diary during this campaign, and it's really interesting. And so he's talking about the brigade when they're at Bardstown, and he has this exchange with an officer in the brigade, and he kind of sets it up as a scene from like a play or something. So he sets it up scene, tent. He says, "Enter officer," and the officer says, "How are you, Major?" And this is Major Gaylor. Major says, "Pretty well, Captain. How are you?" The officer says, "Tolerable." Major, I am nearly naked. Have you got any clothes? Any shoes or boots? These are all I've got. Holding up a very dilapidated looking pair of brogans. Major, I haven't one. Officer, I see some out here. Can I get a pair of them? No. I received only 45 pairs for the whole division, and your regiment received its share. The officer says, I know, but they are all given to the men. Now, Major, I would consider it a great accommodation to get a pair of boots. Would pay any price for them. And Gaylor says, I tell you, they don't belong to me. The officer says, well, I can't go any further without these shoes. That settles that. And then he says, there's some Latin here. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he throws in some Latin. GD quartermasters and the man who invented them. And that's what the man says as he leaves Gaylor's tent. And so he's the thing about this. Whenever Wood goes up to division command, Gaylor sort of takes over the responsibilities for the division too when it comes to the quartermaster there. And he says, General Wood sent for me today and told me he had issued an order assuming command of the division and had at that same time announced me as division quartermaster. There is no additional rank or pay, but a heap more of responsibility, which I don't think he cared for too much. But later on at Perryville, he says, or on their way to Perryville, he says, we got into camp about 4 o'clock. I rode into town and bought many calicos, etc. There's an old and, to all appearance, has been a thriving town. Claiborne's brigade is here. Had difficulty with Brodwell, the major's brother, and intend to have him arrested. Also Boswell. There is a pretty good chance of a fight in the morning at Perryville. I've asked the general in a note to let me join him, and I'm waiting an answer. Wood, we'll get to him in a little bit. Wood is not enthused about having Gaylor join the fight away from all the quartermaster's wagons because apparently Gaylor gets a little too brave, I guess, if you want to put it that way, and is needlessly exposes himself. So, a soldier in the 45th Mississippi described their condition as light marching order. They had no tents. He says they were not, quote, burdened with baggage. And so I think he's being very sarcastic with that, not having the burden with baggage. So they're not carrying a lot of stuff with them. They've been on campaign from Chattanooga all the way up here. There's some brigades that do get new uniforms and things. I know Adams gets, some of their men get new uniforms just in the days before this. But it seems that Wood's men have not been the lucky regiments to have gotten any of that stuff at this moment. So they arrive here in Perryville on October 7th, the day before the battle. With the little amounts of water to be found, because that's one of the big things about Perryville is the water and the lack of water. A soldier in the 33rd Alabama notes that he and many of his regiment procured their water under a deep lime sink. And he mentions doing that several times during the campaign. They find these limestone rocks and they're able to get into those sinks and they get the water out of that. So the brigade then moves on to the ridge just northwest of the dye house, which we'll be at later this afternoon. Laudell's Arkansas Brigade is stacked up pretty much right next to him on the road that goes behind the hill that we'll be on earlier. So they're really out of the range of fire there. But Wood's Brigade is not. And so we'll be over there and we'll see that later. So though not engaged during the opening phases of the battle, they don't go in until a little bit later in the afternoon. They are under pretty heavy artillery fire from this position here. Loomis and then later Simonson, when they come online, they are going to be putting quite the fire on Wood's Brigade over there by the dye house. One of the soldiers says, a federal battery on a ridge in sight across the field began shelling us when Simple's battery got into position near the right of the 33rd Alabama and near a house, which is the dye house. And in the artillery duel that followed, General S.A.M. Wood, our brigadier, fell or was thrown from his horse and left the field, and the regiments that went in the fight were without the aid of a brigadier, no one assuming the command that I know of or saw. The ranks of most were laying down in line. Each company had thrown their knapsacks into a separate heap, the batteries yet playing on each other. And then someone in one of the Mississippi regiment says, on our part of the line, the battle began about noon. We were subjected to the most merciless shelling for about 2 hours. And there is quite a bit of shelling that goes on over here. Another man in the 32nd Mississippi, Jesse Cheeves, he writes this. W.H. Reese lost his left arm in the same day by a cannonball. And then he corrects himself later. He actually was wounded and has had his left arm amputated. I mean, same thing, I guess. The man in the rear rank behind Reese was struck in the chest by the same ball and knocked 10 or 12 feet and instantly killed. The rider was to the right of Reese, his left arm touching Reese's right when he fell. So that is super close. We were exposed to a terrible fire of solid shot and shell. The rider noticed one ball that fell just in front of the line. It was about the size and length of a mason's fruit jar, but in the shape of a mini ball. So that's really interesting. That type of round that's flying through the air at them. It's not a cannonball. We remained an hour under very heavy cannon fire. Sometimes the balls would come as fast as the stroke of a clock. They made all kinds of noise as they passed over. Sometimes it seemed they would dip down after us as they passed over the line. 12 or 14 feet behind our line was a large shell bark hickory tree full of nuts. Now and then a ball would pass through the top, and bark and nuts would fairly rain down. At 2 o'clock, our line battle moved forward, and then we'll get into what happens after that. So while they're under this artillery fire, this is where Wood gets wounded, and the sources, they're a little different on how and what happens to him here. But he somehow gets struck by a piece of shrapnel. So I don't know how serious of a head wound it is that he gets here, but he's hit in the head. And someone in the 33rd Alabama sees him, and he says he was struck in the head by a shell fragment, which so disabled him that he could not continue in the action until its conclusion. I recall seeing him as he was struck, and although at some distance, I could realize that he was seriously injured. When the shell struck him, he was so dazed that he ran to and fro, oblivious to danger and unable to control himself. So that's, I don't know, going back and forth, walking around until someone gets him out of the way. But his wound was much regretted by the men, and we're glad for him to return later to the command. So we are getting ready to move to our next spot here very shortly. But before we do, just want to talk about Simple's battery, because we mentioned them, and they're up over there by the dye house. They don't really move forward as far as we know. There is no source that says that their battery moves with the brigade. Nothing says that. So, but just as a reminder, the 16th Alabama and the 3rd Confederate, they are going to remain way over there at the dye house with that section of Simple's battery. And they do not advance with the other 3.5 regiments. But Simple's battery is, this is going to be their first fight. And they are pretty unique organization here too, because part of the battery, it's going to be divided. One section's going to be over there by the dye house. The other section's going to be in town, where we had some of that town fighting that we talked about last year. And they're kind of over there by the I think it's called Harmonia College. Was it a female academy? Is that what it was called? Something like that? Yeah. So they're way over there. But this battery was organized in March of 1862, and this is their first major action. Simple is originally a Virginian. He's 40 years old at the Battle of Perryville. Lawyer by trade, just like everybody else we've been talking about, it seems like. And then during the Army's move to Chattanooga, Simple, he writes a lot of letters to his wife, and they're pretty interesting to read. And he comments a lot on the men and the aspects of the march getting to Chattanooga. And he tells his wife, "You have no idea of the trouble and vexations of a march when 110 horses have to be watched, and 128 men who become children as soon as they get into the Army." So, it sounds like my job. Anyway, I'm a middle school teacher, so it's like, man, tell my wife that you have no idea. But anyways, so here at Perryville, like we said, the battery split into two sections. The section that remains over by the dye house, they have 3.8-inch rifles. The other two are the smoothbore guns that remain over there in town. So the dye house is about 1,200 yards, and they are going to be there for a while, and they are going to be dueling with the guns that are over here on this ridge for a while until Wood is hit. So with that, oh, and by the way, this is Captain Simple right here. So nice color picture of him here. So that's him. We're going to go ahead and move on down here to the next spot. We're going to move over to the sign that talks about the slaughter pen. It's going to be talking about Liddell mostly at that spot, but when we get over there, we'll talk about some of the other regiments. Because before we go to the other side of the slaughter pen, I want us to get a good look of the field, because this is the area that they're going to be advancing across. And so we'll kind of get right in the middle of that, and then go from there. So, like I said earlier, if you don't want to walk all the way over there, by all means, meet us around. Take a right. When you get to the crossroads, take another right, and then you can see at the foundation and driveway where a house used to be. There's a big old tree there too. There's plenty of spots there, I think, where a lot of people can park if they want to. So, but if you're going to hike with us, we'll go ahead and start heading that way. Yeah. What would that be in somewhere? They have a 2 hours.
Ezra, are we going all the way to the sign?
Being somewhere in like clothing and carrying a 30-pound rifle. Not to mention your knapsack.
We did reenactment here. This is 2006. I came. We came across this area somewhere.
Alabama, and we said they weren't engaged here, but a little bit about them. They do have some experience. They fought at Mill Springs. They were at Shiloh, where when you combine both those casualties together, it's close to 230 men they've lost. And they are commanded by Colonel William Basis Wood here at Perryville, but they're going to be held in reserve, and they don't enter the battle. And I'm thinking that's because of the confusion that breaks down once Wood gets hit, the other Wood gets hit. And I mean, the officers, I mean, they're dropping like flies here pretty quickly. And the quartermaster we talked about earlier, I think he takes it upon himself to lead the brigade at some point. And so either Colonel Wood does not get the memo, it's time to advance, or he is ordered to stay back with that section of artillery, which seems like overkill to keep 2 regiments back there with a section, but not really sure what happened there. Now, the 3rd Confederate is a very interesting regiment. They're not really going to see any action, but the men of that regiment apparently hate their colonel. William Preston, who is in the 33rd Alabama, he kind of wrote, he said, the 3rd Confederate Battalion was in Wood's brigade. In command was Lieutenant Colonel Keep, a tyrant who punished his men in many ways. He at times had them carry fence rails or posts of woods along the road while we were marching, and we heard it whispered among the privates of his that he would not survive the first battle he got into. So I don't think they mean by enemy fire. And we did not see him after that battle, and his men expressed themselves as being glad he was gone. So I guess Keep eventually gets removed. However, I never heard it rumored that any officers of the 33rd Alabama were shot by any of our own men intentionally, for there were no tyrannical officers such as Colonel Keep in the regiment, and usually men concluded they could not get justice at the hands of their officers. They asked for got transferred to another command. So that's the 3rd Confederate, and that's all we're going to say about them because they don't move from their spot way over there. But the 15th Battalion of Mississippi Sharpshooters. Not a lot is written about them here at Perryville, but I'm assuming they are pretty active. If it's anything like Adams' Brigade down over there around the bottom house and Ned Austin's Sharpshooter Battalion, those men were moving all the time. And I would assume that these guys would be doing the same thing. But they are commanded by Captain Abner T. Hawkins. And there's not a lot of info about this guy out there, except for he does lose his leg at Chickamauga and he dies from that wound. But he seems to be one of these guys that pays very special attention to the tactics and trying to learn and be as good at that as he can possibly be. Because there was a man who is in his battalion who in 1863, so this is January 1863, he wrote on January 26, he says, nothing of much interest occurred. Weather cloudy, threatening rain, my time nearly all taken up with my company, having pay and muster rolls fixed, and in studying tactics. Major Hawkins has a class in which he is very strict, making some progress in tactics. Hope I can become more proficient in it by diligent study and application. My main desire is, though, that I may become more thoroughly drilled in tactics that will fit me for the great battle of my life, the battle of the Christian warrior must fight. So, I guess according to this, Hawkins has classes with his officers and is very strict in teaching them these different tactics. There is some references to some flanking movements that happen later on when we get over to that spot. And the more I think about it, the more I think it was probably these sharpshooters that were the ones that were getting up around these flanks. So these are the ones that are going to be able to move the most easily, and it's only 2 companies, and they're not tied down by the whole size of the regiment there. So, but these men are all from Mississippi, but also there are some from Alabama and Tennessee in this battalion as well. Even though it's the 15th Battalion of Mississippi Sharpshooters, it's got men from several states. So they are going to be skirmishing with the Union skirmishers down along Doctors Creek earlier on in the day. And then once the brigade moves, they're going to move along with the brigade. All right, so the 45th Mississippi, also known as the 33rd Mississippi, was actually just battalion sized, wasn't really the size of a full regiment. And originally it was the 3rd Mississippi Battalion. But they had 3 companies of the 16th Alabama added to it to make it a full regiment, and that was after the Shiloh reorganization. This regiment was commanded by Aaron B. Hardcastle, the one that is famous from Shiloh of being the Confederate officer that kind of kicks things off there. He is not here though. He is off doing other things. He has his leg fractured in August, and so his horse kicked him, and so he is not on duty during this time. But in 1900, he writes something in Vicksburg newspaper, and he says that his regiment never had an official designation from Richmond and was just known as the 45th Mississippi. So during the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Charlton, I guess that's how you pronounce it, Charlton, is going to be the one that's in command here. And there is, some of the men are actually from the 27th Alabama who avoided capture at Fort Donelson. So these men, these regiments, just because it says Mississippi, it doesn't mean they are made up all of Mississippi men. All right, the next regiment is the 32nd Mississippi. This was commanded by Colonel Mark Lowry. And so we're going to be talking, Lowry's going to be the guy that eventually takes over command here. He's a senior colonel. And he was 34 years old here at Perryville. And he is a preacher who is originally from Tennessee. But during the Mexican War, he serves as a volunteer, doesn't see any action though. And then before the war, he is the pastor of a congregation near Farmington, Mississippi, where it's on the march to Corinth there, and there's an action that was fought there at Farmington. He's from that area. And at the start of the war, his congregation wants him to, they tell him, you need to join up. So he does. And he initially joins in 1861. Mississippi has this army of 10,000 that is supposed to be 10,000 temporary volunteers that go up to Kentucky. It gets nowhere near 10,000 men, but he is one of those few men that is in these Mississippi state regiments, not the actual regiments that we know him by as later. That gets really confusing when you're studying the early part of the war, and there's several Mississippi regiments that have the same designation, but one is state troops, the other one is in Confederate service. But he serves in that for a while, sees no action, and then when the 32nd is mustered into service in the summer of 1862, he becomes the colonel. And so after Wood is wounded, he is the one that is going to take over command, and the men say that he led it admirably. That's what you get about Lowry there, until he himself is wounded. So as Wood would always take over the division when Buckner was gone, Lowry's the one that would step up and command the brigade. And then before the battle started, he reverts back to commander of 32nd Mississippi. So in later life, Lowry writes a short autobiography, and he doesn't say a lot about Perryville, about a paragraph. And this is what he says. He says, I'd engaged in some active skirmishing about Corinth, but the Battle of Perryville was the first regular engagement I was ever in. And he's commanding a brigade. Just before the commencement of the battle, General Buckner resumed command of the division, and General Wood of the brigade, which sent me back to my regiment. But before we got near the enemy, General Wood was slightly wounded by a shell. It's funny, he says slightly wounded, another guy says he is walking around dazed and doesn't know who he is. And I resumed the command of the brigade. So I commanded a brigade in the first battle I was ever in. And I think he's going to do an okay job up until he gets hit. So this is Colonel Lowry here. He does have a pretty good record after Perryville throughout the rest of the war. And the last regiment we're going to talk about before we move on is the 33rd Alabama. This regiment was in service since 1861, but Perryville is really going to be its first major action. It manned the defenses of Pensacola until it was sent up to Mississippi, and it is commanded by Colonel S.A.M. Adams. So no relation to John and Sam Adams from the Revolution, but Colonel S.A.M. Adams. And he was originally from South Carolina. And here at Perryville, Adams is 33 years old. And guess what he was? Lawyer. And but before he was a lawyer, when he was 21 years old, he was the principal of an academy in Greenville, Alabama. As I don't know how that went. I mean, as someone who's around middle school kids every day, having someone 21 years old be a principal, they must have eaten him alive. I don't know how long that lasted, but he was there.
Discipline standards might have been a little different.
Might have been a little less. Yeah. They might have been disciplining him more than anything. So he also served in the Alabama House of Representatives for 2 terms. He was elected in 1857 and 59. And then he begins the war as a lieutenant in the 9th Alabama. He actually spent some time in Virginia with that regiment before he returned to Alabama to command the 33rd. And this is then Lieutenant Sam Adams from earlier on in the war, before he was a colonel, but that's him. He also, we'll get to later, he does not survive the war, but he is going to be here. So from where we are at, eventually the brigade's going to end up in that area over there. The Russell House is that general area where it used to be.
Where the white posts are. Clearing.
Yep. Yep. And so you can see the foundation's still up over there. They're eventually going to be moving across this field, the slaughter pen. The exact movement they make, some maps have them way on that side, some maps have them over here on this side, as far down as over here. Probably, like we said yesterday, probably somewhere in between. But they're eventually going to be moving that way. But before they get to over here is where their fight pretty much ends over here. They're going to get in some pretty heavy action over there where Harris's battery is supposedly supposed to be at. And we'll talk about that battery and where it may or may not have been as well, because when you look at maps, when you look at the sources, that battery sometimes is just right over there, sometimes it's way over there, and sometimes it's down over here. It's hard to tell. And so whenever you do get on the ground over there, you can kind of see, I think this might have been a better spot for a battery to be besides the one where, you know, the panels are at, but we'll talk more about that when we get over here. We're going to be moving down to the side of the vicinity of the Widow Gibson cabin. So we're going to just be going right down this way. So, yeah.
Can I add a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you all don't know exactly where you are, see the water tower over there? That is on 150, the Springfield Pike, and that's just above the town of Perryville. If you look, there's a white barn right over to the right compared to the left there. That's the site of Washington Artillery, Louisiana. That's where they were. And the owner of that found a buried limber chest with 40 rounds of Archer bolts in it. And he, on his property there. And then if you look, you see I call it Jesus Crucifixion Hill there. That goes up past the dye house. So you can see where you're located according to the modern day area. But from anywhere on the field, you can see that water tower. You can probably pretty much tell where you're standing. And so, and of course, this is the old Macro Pike here, and the bottom house is right over the top of the hill there. But if you go this way, if you see the ridge over here, you see the telephone pole there, and then there's a clearing through there. That's where Manny's Brigade and Donaldson Brigade charged from the Doug Road, which is on that other lip over there. So you got a pretty good idea. You know, that's pretty much south. This is east, going this way. The bottom house sits facing due north. So you've got your coordinates. Just for information.
Thank you.
So you can tell where you are by that water tower and by the Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
We'll go ahead and
Graduated 89, it was after that.
Okay, all right.
Red Hawk Yellow Belly. Afraid of early.
Yeah, they were. I mean, that was, you know, they were politically correct before political correctness was even a thing.
Yeah, they folded quick.
Yeah, it's only my second one, so I'm not into it. You know, you get to see all these other places that you wouldn't even know about.
Well, that's the thing is that this is the second I've been on this trip. I've been on most of them. I've been on every one of them. And I have never been on this trail, and I never was on the one last night.
I didn't even learn about this on back to Ohio.
Yeah, I did a cemetery tour of the town this year, and then started following stuff.
I like the one that you did something on North Range back like in April.
Yeah, I could make that.
No, I mean, he filmed it just by himself and he put it on his Facebook page. So then I went to North Range by myself for a weekend in July. This guy went for Friday after work and get back on Saturday.
Small. It was cool. Yeah, my son and I did a cattle leader.
I don't know. I'm still learning. I don't know anything about Black Rain.
Across the river, Brandenburg. Yeah, and so that was another trip.
Yeah, I did. It was someone get
So it's like you know what they had.
We are at the site of the Widow Gibson cabin. Gibson's husband had died several months before. She's going to be here during the battle, hiding underneath the floorboards, I think, for most of the fight. And then once the battle is over, the cabin is just wrecked and dead animals, dead men all around the place. And there's a neat little story on the tablet there if you want to check that out. But she's got a corn crib that's I think it says like 150 yards away, about that general direction. But the brigade is going to be moving across what I think is this particular way, coming this way, because there's a battery up here on these hills. It's commanded by Captain Harris, his 19th Indiana Battery. And when we get up there, you can kind of see where this battery is and where it's firing at on Wood's brigade, because Wood is, well, Lowry's brigade, I guess, by this point. The brigade is, part of the brigade is going to help capture those guns. And on some maps, they have these guns right here. Other maps have them over there. Some maps, I've seen them on that hill right there. And so when we get up over here to the site where the interpretation tablets actually are at, you can kind of judge for yourself where the better place for a battery would be. But we'll get there in just a second though. So as the brigade begins to move in that general direction, you also have Colonel George Webster's brigade is over here in this area as well. But W.P. Preston, he's the one that keeps the diary of the 33rd Alabama. He says the 33rd Alabama and the 32nd Mississippi to our left, so you got the 33rd on the right, 32nd Mississippi on the left, moved in at right shoulder arms. However, the 16th Alabama, Colonel W.B. Wood, I think, being the ranking colonel, and on the right of the brigade did not advance, remaining with Semple's battery. The command to the 33rd Alabama was to guide left, and to the 32nd Mississippi was to guide right. So if you're thinking about how these regiments are set up here, he says they're on the right, 32nd's on the left. The 33rd is supposed to guide left, 32nd Mississippi is supposed to guide right. So eventually they're going to start to converge there a little bit. And if you've ever been in a reenactment where you've got two battalions start to collide, there is a lot of shouting and shoving, and which I felt a little vindicated, having experienced that myself several times, and reading what he had to say here. He says, we moved down and across a stubble field under a very accurate shell fire, and about the time we crossed a dry gully in the valley, they opened on us with small arms when our boys began dropping more frequently. Soon we began double quicking and yelling loudly as we could, and our officers kept the flanks of the two regiments pressed closely together. Company B of the 33rd was at times partly in front or rear or right of the 32nd Mississippi. So that's where they're starting to hit each other. The pressing together causing some boys to use language they did not learn at church. So I've heard that. The pressing together caused the two regiments heading straight toward the battery, which got to using grape about 1 1/4 inch in diameter. And the right of the regiment was unflated from our right, and that's how he spells it, unflated. Then we came to a low rail fence in which some gaps were torn down in front of the guns, where we wavered under the murderous fire. Then someone called fall back, which we did for a short distance and lay down. But our officers who were not wounded urged us forward, and we rushed the line. So we'll kind of move into where this rushing may have been here in just a second. But Private Jesse Cheese at 32nd Mississippi, when he talked about over there that those nuts were falling out of the tree and the bark from the shelling they were under. But at 2:00 p.m., our line of battle moved forward. I think it wasn't quite 2 o'clock, it's a little bit later. The enemy began just across an opposite range of hills, the valley between us being from 600 to 800 yards wide. Our cannon ceased firing until the line had advanced far enough for the balls to pass over our heads. Our guns behind us and the enemies in front, and the roar of musketry made such a noise as the boys had never heard. We were in a field all the time and tore the fences down as we advanced. We drove the Yanks from behind one rock fence. The rider, as he refers to himself as the rider, was talking with a comrade a few months ago who was wounded just before we crossed this fence and lay upon the field until 3 o'clock at night. Our victory was complete. So we're going to move up over that direction here in just a moment. Actually, we're going to move up over there now because it'll make more sense from where that battery may have been at. You can kind of see the fields of fire, possible fields of fire that this battery would have had, and the direction that Wood's men would have made to attack this battery and been successful at actually attacking it. So we're going to go up this way. There's a pretty big hill up over here, so just get ready for that. Yep.
You mentioned the battery could have been in 3 different places. Could he not have been in all 3?
Mm-hmm.
They move batteries around all the time.
Yeah.
So
There's one thing I've seen where they may have started up over there, but
Yeah.
they moved back and kind of
this is a
leapfrogged
better
back.
vantage point here.
Yep.
Oh, moved up. Oh, this is better. No, it's not. Oh, let's go back.
Yeah.
So,
And what we'll see, this particular battery, two of their guns get away, and they keep firing as they move back. So, yeah, that's possible. They could have been just wherever that best opportunity was for them to inflict damage. They may have moved that spot.
time.
When it got too hot, moved to a different spot, and just keep on doing that. So yeah, that is a possibility. And because when we're up there on the hill, it just doesn't seem like the best place. It just seems to me they can't depress the tubes enough to, if infantry's coming up that hill, it just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do much from that position up there. Over here, when you look at it, I mean, it's perfect for 6 guns to be spread out. It's not such a drop down over here, so if they're coming up at you, I mean, you can lay into them.
What about
Very
condition, battlefield, wood line, similar, different?
I think it's pretty different now. Yeah.
Mostly under cultivation.
Okay.
With some patches of woods and some patches of open woods, but mostly all of it's under cultivation.
Okay.
And this is the same battery that allegedly the 16th Tennessee is supposed to be charging. If you go to that position where the interpretation is today, and you start to walk back, you reverse the 16th Tennessee's alleged advance, you can't see that battery. You can't see that position. So this kind of, supports Gunny Gillam's theory about the direction of the 16th Tennessee and the direction of Donaldson's brigade where it initially may or may not go. And that battery allegedly is not captured until about 5 o'clock in the afternoon-ish, right?
Yeah.
But Donaldson and particularly John Savage and the reports coming from the 16th Tennessee talk about how early in the fighting they helped capture a battery or capture the battery, depending on point of view. It doesn't make any sense that it's Sam Harris's 19th Indiana. It just doesn't. Even if it's up here. Now, if it's up here, maybe it could have been seen by Donaldson's position, but you really can't. I mean, I reversed this walk last year, and you just can't see it. Now, it doesn't mean he didn't know it was there through other sources, but there's no source that says that. Like when Wharton clears that ridge, could have Wharton seen the 19th Indiana? Maybe. And does that information get passed into Donaldson's brigade? Perhaps. We don't know that at all. There's no source that says that. And so it kind of backs up a little bit what Jamie is talking about, like what was that battery target? So if you were here on Jamie's Donaldson's tour last year, we talked a lot about what he thought that where Donaldson went, particularly the 16th Tennessee. And again, so sight lines, being what they are, et cetera, it's difficult. But Joe, to your point, absolutely right. And I think Harris moved at least one time.
Yeah.
At least one time.
Yeah.
And it'd be great if we get some ground penetrating radar up there and find some friction primers and all that good stuff that comes along with batteries, right? And you could, I won't say definitively prove it, but you could sure heck build a lot more evidence. Or
at
just
least
prove
it'll
it.
narrow the picture.
You can narrow that down.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They fired over 900 rounds, and
Yeah.
so there's going to be
some junk.
Yeah, they're deployed from noonish 1 o'clock on, right? So until the 2/3 of the battery's captured, about 5 o'clock ish in the afternoon. So yeah, I mean they're active.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's not just wood coming at them. There's other troops milling about. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. We'll go up this big old hill over here.
They did have. Is that where they?
Either 2026 or 2027.
And particularly at a battle like this, early in the war, but we know very little about it. So that was pretty standard. I mean, you got your people really was good. Now, on the federal side, most of what's over there is also granted. So they're not into that whole.
This is the traditional site of Harris's Battery. It's got the tablet over there, and like we said, you know, this where the traditional site is, possibly that ridge line over there too. I walked that length yesterday, and it just, to me, it just seems like it'd be the better spot. It seemed like the views were a little bit better, especially if the trees, you know, weren't there. This just it seems like if you're infantry, a good place to defend. But I mean, if you're up over, you got to depress those tubes down. I mean, that's a pretty steep angle, so I'm not for sure, but possibly. So, but a man in the 98th Ohio who was in Webster's Brigade, who was over here in this area, his name was Private Wesley Polson, and he said, during this time we were watching the line in front of us. It was a grand sight to see. The line was composed of some of Bragg's best disciplined troops. Now, I don't know if that was, he doesn't say if it was Wood or Lowry's brigade. Most likely, if it's coming right at them, most likely it was, but can't say for sure. He says the men kept in excellent order, and when our battery would belch forth solid shot or shell at them, the line would fall as if all the men were linked together. As soon as the shot or shell struck, they would rise at a word from their commander and march forward till they again would see the smoke and again prostrate themselves to the earth. So it's move, get on the ground, get up, move, get on the ground, constantly doing that. They seemed not to notice a man killed and wounded, but boldly marched on, leaving them behind, and keeping their ranks well closed. They were marching down a declivity, and we could plainly see the killed and wounded left behind. One shell burst in their line that killed and wounded at least 12 men. So when the brigade is moving up towards Webster's Brigade, which is in this area, and the battery, that's probably when Lowry is hit, and he's hit in the arm. And he's got to leave the field, and interesting enough for him, he's able to go home to recover, which his home is pretty close to Corinth. And in the fall of 1862, Corinth is swarming with the Union Army there. And so wherever it is that he is recuperating at, he has his family snuck through the lines to get to where he is staying at. And so that was pretty interesting that he was able to do that. But from his own autobiography, like we said earlier, he says, this was the first battle I was ever in. He says, but I was soon painfully wounded in my left arm, by which I was disabled about 8 weeks. So the battery that's up in this one of these hills here, wherever the battery was, it's a battery of 6 guns, and Harris is able to remove 2 of them during the fight. The reason he's not able to get the rest of them out of here is because vast majority of those horses are killed. You know, when they come up over this hill or whichever hill it was, and the amount of dead horses that were in the area, I mean, that's you can't move these guns without them. So they got 2 guns out of here, and I think they got a few of the caissons out too. But the other 4 guns are left behind. So a soldier in the 98th Ohio, he said that when he returned to the site the next day, he estimated that at least 12 horses lay dead. Another soldier says there's more than 20 horses. I mean, when you think about the number of horses that a battery has, typically over 100. Some of those horses may have been wounded and just wandered off somewhere else. Or if you got 3 horses wounded or killed in a section, you can't get that gun out with 3. So maybe that's one reason too they couldn't get these guns out. The number of dead horses would have been pretty astronomical here. And that's something we'll talk about with the artillery stuff later. I mean, the horses are good targets, and if you can take out the horses, you can take out those guns' ability to move. So anyways, the 80th Indiana is backing up this battery on its left, and then there is an Ohio regiment on its right that's like stacked. Its 2 wings are stacked right up against each other. But this the 80th Indiana is over here, and it supposedly the 80th Indiana is going to be putting some of that fire into the brigade's right wing as it's moving up against the battery. We mentioned earlier that one of the men in the 33rd Alabama said that, you know, as they're moving up, they start getting this tremendous fire from the right. And, you know, if that regiment is kind of swooping around, this could be an area, but there's also an area up over there too where you can see a regiment could have gotten up around there and could have provided some just great supporting fire against whatever's coming up that ridge. So let's see, where was I? There we go. So another source from the 33rd Alabama, in a newspaper they wrote out all the casualties from the regiment, and said First Lieutenant Joseph Pelham of Skipperville was wounded in the left thigh, broken by a piece of shell. We were then within about 200 yards and directly in front of a battery of 4 24-pound brass guns. And we're not quite, but, and we're carrying their first line.
Might have felt like it.
Yeah, probably felt like it. Yeah, it's like how they exaggerate some things here. Primary sources, you always got to take some stuff with a grain of salt, because from his perspective, that might have been the biggest dang thing he's ever seen shooting at him, and you know, it wasn't. He says, and they were carrying their first line, and a little later we passed between the gun in pursuit of them. William Tiller was killed at Perryville, 1862, shot in the left breast with grape shot, about an inch or so in diameter, was in 50 or 60 paces and in front of the, he says, 4 20-pound guns, again, that we were capturing, was the first one of the company to die in this battle. So that's something. Andrew Jackson Wiggins, 6th Sergeant, killed at Perryville, right thigh broken by a grape shot about 50 paces in front of a battery. When we fell back from the attack on their second line, which was behind a wall, which seemed to be a rock fence, he had been shot in the head by a mini ball. So the guy is wounded in the thigh by a grape shot, and then while he's sitting there, he gets shot in the head and he's killed. Aaron T., I'm not sure, there's 2 different last names for this man, but Ard, was wounded in the left arm by a grape shot, died there at Perryville in 1862. First Lieutenant Joseph Pelham was, all right, I think we got him. It was also about this time that Colonel Adams went down, and several of the officers went into the fight mounted, where some people were talking to me about earlier, you know, how these guys are mounted. They go in mounted, but one by one, those horses are taken out, or the men on top of them are taken out. Adams' horse was hit, and then Adams himself was hit in the foot, and he was no longer to command the regiment. So you've got these regiments that are commanded by some majors and lieutenant colonels, and so it's, the communication between the regiments is also going to break down. We mentioned earlier, you know, there's several regiments that are moving, at least 3, and then a sharpshooter battalion. But from the men that are on the ground, you only hear about the 2, 33rd Alabama and the 32nd Mississippi. What we're going to get into here in a second is I'm thinking that the 45th Mississippi was so small that it seemed more like a small battalion than a regiment, and so they just kind of discount it, or they don't really think of it as a completely separate unit. And it seems like they would have been on the far right. And then some of the Webster's Brigade sources, especially up here at the guns, they talk about some of these Confederates are getting around on the right. That must have been, most likely in my opinion, must have been those sharpshooters that were just, you know, getting around, because like we said, those guys can move the easiest, they can move the fastest. They're not moving in your typical line of battle. You know, they're in probably skirmish formation, and they're leapfrogging each other, and it's able to move a whole lot quicker. So Harris gets 2 of his guns, falls back towards the Dixville crossroads, takes up another line, and those 2 guns, they keep firing. After his men get out of here, though, some of the Ohio boys that are in this area start manning the guns themselves until it gets too hot, and then everyone just starts to fall back. And then as they're falling back, that's when the right Q companies of 33rd Alabama, they come up in through here, and they swarm through the guns. Donaldson's men are also probably part of this. There's some sources where it talks about the brigade is moving up, they capture the guns, there's some kind of small counterattack that drives them back down the hill, and then Donaldson's men come up, and together they rush through the guns again. So when we're talking about the maps, there's going to be a lot of differences here. If you've got the map booklet, it's got the guns, I think, back over here, way over there. And Wood's Brigade is way over here, not even close to the guns. but you know, several sources in here are talking about how they went through the guns and they helped capture them. And even some you get the upper reports from the higher ranking officers and generals, and they mention, you know, Woods Brigade captured the battery with the help of Cheatham's men. That's about as specific as they get them. So after the guns are captured, the brigade is going to start moving towards the Russell House over there. There's some resistance that is still in that area. Adams is coming up on the other side of the road. They're going to stall. A lot of that has to do with what's on their left flank, way out over there on Peters Hill. They start getting some flanking fire coming in from their left. That makes Adams pretty nervous because he has no idea where his division commander is, Patton Anderson, probably, who's over there with Powell. He doesn't like that situation, so he pulls back towards the bottom house. Claiborne runs out of ammunition. He's up in that declivity over there that we mentioned earlier. He says he got within 75 yards of the Russell House. I don't think he is that close at all. But he's in that area, runs out of ammunition. Then we've got Brown and Jones are coming up in that area. We'll talk about Jones here in a little bit. And then you've got Wood. And Wood is also going to be pushing towards the Russell House. And so we're going to move over in that direction. And then we're going to see how this fight ends for this particular brigade. And once they run into some fresh troops when they get up over in that area. So let's move that way.
What's the ultimate disposition of the capture artillery pieces? Are they able to drag them off? Do they give them back?
They
up?
never mentioned. I would have. Yeah, whatever they had whatever they did during that night. You know, I don't. The Ohio man that comes over here to the spot, he doesn't mention seeing the guns here. He doesn't mention that. He just mentions the horses and the dead everywhere. So I don't know if they were able to drag those guns off or not. I would think they would make an effort to do that at night. Yeah, because when Liddell comes through here, as the sun's going down, I mean, he gets the crossroads, and they get McCook's wagons and everything else. And I would imagine at that point in time, try to get all the stuff out of here as we can. They needed those things, you know. So
that would have required
more horses.
Horses, right?
Yeah.
So okay, if I have a battery, my battery's gotten as where, right? Because I've only gotten so far with the Confederate batteries. I'm going to have to detach those horses to come up and swap a gun out. I may or may not be doing that
and they've been
at 7 o'clock at night,
right?
Because of everything else is going on right behind us.
Yeah.
Right.
So, as an aside, at Shiloh, Woods Brigade burst out from Review Field and breaks a federal line there near the Water Oaks Pond. And there's a Ohio battery there. I think it's Burroughs in 16th Ohio. They capture that because they've got weird rifles. They can't suppress the tubes. So the same thing there. You know, can't suppress the tubes. You can't kill infantry.
You're in the military crest or you're on the regular crest?
Yeah, I know, because
that's also true, right?
Yeah.
If I'm an experienced battery commander, I'm going to up here, right?
Or maybe I'm back here and pushing things up, right? I mean, but intelligently, right? I'm reducing my recoil. I'm on the right part of the crest.
And one of the interesting things about the battery here, and even before Harris's men get out of this spot, those Ohio men are helping them move the guns back. Every time they fire, you know, they set back several feet. Those guys are coming up there and helping them push them back into place. And it gets to the point where those guys are just exhausted from loading and firing. If you ever loaded a gun, God, over and over, it is exhausting.
There's also another aspect too, because as the Confederates are pushing on this side of the road, the Federals are bending back, and they are now facing to the south. Like the 50th Ohio's out that way and whatnot. So you've still got a lot of pressure in this area. Really until Liddell opens it up. Little opens it up. Before he opens it up.
21st Ohio?
I don't know. I'm guessing, but when you stand here,
it's the White House that everyone's talking about in their reports. Some of the Union reports say they call it the mansion, which when you look at the picture, it's not much of a mansion, but you know, for somebody who may have lived in some small cabin before, that might have been a mansion to them. So the brigade moves across here, which is now called the slaughter pen for good reason. We'll hear about in a minute. And they move up past the house. As they're chasing off what's left of Lytle and Harris and Webster, they're going to halt there for a while, and they are met by some fresh troops coming over from Gilbert's Corps, which you got the Brigade of Michael Gooding coming up. And they are going to be really duking it out over there for several minutes. Some of the soldiers they talk about, they're engaged for at least 30 minutes that they're firing here. But we'll get that in a second. So by the time they get over here, it's probably about 5:15. And so it's starting to get a little dark. So it's starting to fade. If you want to get a good idea, at 6:15 tonight, looking about how dark it is at that point, that's about how dark it would have been at 5:15 then. So General McCook reports that Rousseau's division was so hard pressed and under such devastating artillery fire from the several batteries that are down over there that we're going to talk about later today, that form up over there, it gets to be too hot of an area, and they fall back in that direction and towards past the crossroads over there. As Wood or Lowry advances, whoever's in command, I'm going to say it's Gaylor at this point. He's the quartermaster. Claiborne was to his left, but running low on ammunition. And to Claiborne's left was Adams over there. So with him out of the fight, we have heard of Lieutenant Colonel Charlton. One source says he was wounded, but I have not been able to find that anywhere else. There's not a whole lot on the guy anyway. So he may have also been hit. So you got the brigade commander out, all three regimental commanders, it seems, have been hit. And so the quartermaster, Frank Gaylor, seems to have taken it upon himself to start leading the brigade. And earlier we talked about he asked Wood for permission to join the brigade in the attack, and Wood was very hesitant to allow that. Because apparently at Shiloh he was a little too reckless in his behavior there. But Gaylor, there are several things written about Gaylor that I'm going to read through here. This is Gaylor, by the way, brigade quartermaster, and sometimes division quartermaster without the pay and the added responsibility. That's who we're going to be talking about here. So this is from someone's memoir later on in the 19th century as they remembered this. But he says, when the line of battle was formed, Major Gaylor, leaving his wagon train in charge of his assistant, Major Martin Watt, repaired to General Wood's headquarters. General Wood ordered him to return to his proper place of duty. He assured his chief that the wagon trains would be properly cared for, and that he deemed it his duty to discharge the task and incur the dangers of a soldier. Soon afterward, the engagement began. General Wood, early in this action, was wounded and borne from the field. Within 20 minutes, each of his staff had fallen, and every field officer of the brigade. Gaylor had made himself conspicuous along the line of battle, and by common consent was deemed the commanding officer or leader of the brigade. Its ranks were decimated when at 5 o'clock in the afternoon it was again ordered to advance. The brigade moved forward at the word of command. Gaylor and Captain L.A. McClung of Florence, Alabama, leading the charge. McClung fell dangerously wounded. Gaylor sought to bear him from the field. The Union column advanced rapidly, and McClung, conscious that Gaylor would not remove or remain with them in safety, urged him to save himself. Gaylor answered, "I will never desert a friend in your condition." These were the last words he was heard to utter. He attached a white handkerchief to his saber and raised it above himself and fallen comrade. It was hardly visible amid the smoke of battle, and it's also getting really dark. And it says, in the shadows of night were closing in on the living and the dead when a bullet pierced Gaylor's brain. Someone else says he gets shot in the chest, so he does get hit, and he dies. But a few weeks later in November, a newspaper called the Weekly Mississippian has a whole column just about Gaylor, and so they add in some other details about him here. They said, and of course you got to remember in these newspaper accounts, whenever they are remembering somebody, they tend to just really embellish, over glorify the person. But so just keep that in mind as you listen to this. But they said, there has never fallen on any battlefield of this revolution a soldier and gentleman more universally esteemed than Frank M. Gaylor of Memphis, who is among the slain at Perryville. He is one of the editors of the Avalanche, which is a newspaper. On the morning of the battle, Major Gaylor applied to General Wood for permission to go upon the field. The general hesitated, reminding Gaylor of his recklessness at Shiloh and Farmington. It was in this last mentioned battle, Farmington, that Gaylor found one of our batteries, Captain Baker's, with not force enough to man its guns. He dismounted and for some time supplied the cannoneers with cartridges from the caissons. He led in pursuit of the abolitionists and narrowly escaped with his life on several occasions, and that was at Farmington. General Wood was again prevailed upon to assent to his presence on the battlefield. He rode at once to the front of the 33rd Mississippi, which also we call the 45th here, and every man of which was his personal friend. I doubt it, but you know, they put that. On his appearance in the front of the regiment, he was greeted with loud cheers. He turned in his saddle and pointing to the Yankees said, "Boys, if you will follow me, not one of those accursed invaders of the South shall live to tell the tale of the Battle of Perryville." The regiment was almost instantly ordered to advance, and its colonel was very soon severely wounded. That might have been Charlton, but not really sure about that one. But him being wounded at Perryville, except something in Confederate, they mentioned something about Confederate veteran, about him being wounded there. That's the only place I could find it. But Gaylor, from 30 to 40 paces in advance of the line, then led the charge. When within 30 or 40 yards of the enemy, deliberately fired at them each with the barrel of his repeater. So I guess he's got his own gun there with him. At this distance, his horse staggered and fell beneath him, pierced by a minie ball. While he was disengaging himself, he saw Adjutant McClung fall severely wounded. He rushed to his assistance, and McClung pointed to the Yankees, begged Gaylor not to approach him. He raised McClung's head, and while giving him water from his canteen, with one hand he waved a white handkerchief above him. At that very instant, a ball pierced his breast, and he fell dead. So, head, breast, either way, he falls dead pretty instantly by this McClung man. Lieutenant Frank Foster of Cheatham's staff, who was worked in the Avalanche newspaper office with him, says, loved Gaylor with all his impassioned nature and found his friend late that night, stark, stiff, and cold on the battlefield. The pale moonbeams rested on Gaylor's face. Foster thought him overcome by fatigue and that he was sleeping. He sought to arouse the slumberer in vain. He tells us that he has been on many a battlefield and witnessed many a scene of mortal anguish, but that he never shed tears and wept as when he stood above the cold, lifeless body of Frank Gaylor. The body was removed to a little churchyard not far from the scene of strife, and at midnight was consigned to its last resting place. The wheel of a broken gun carriage marks the grave of one of the noblest and bravest men who has ever fallen in defense of the South. And I have no idea where he would have been buried, and I have not seen anything that shows where he was buried. He would have no other monument than this, yet there exists in the hearts of those who loved him while he lived, on which shall endure forever. His deeds and virtues are I don't even know how to say that word, but never seen that before. So inscribed on the tablets of our memory, and when in future years the Battle of Perryville is named, we shall ever record a sigh to the memory of Frank Gaylor. The pale moonbeams shall gild the sod above him. The attendant stars shall look down upon the burial place of this hero of Perryville, and his repose may long be undisturbed by the footsteps of those he loved in a sunnier clime. But dark-eyed maidens shall yet seek his grave, and with his wife and children scatter there. With snowy fingers they shall touch the strings of memory, and with soft murmuring assents chant a requiem above the honored dead. So that's what they said. Well, anyway. But back to a man in the 33rd Alabama who would have been on the right of the brigade. Mississippians here on the left. It says, we pushed on over the ridge and down the slope and across a second valley in pursuit of them, and up another slope into some timber to where we met a line behind a fence. So they get up in this area over here. We got within about 30 steps of this fence, but our ranks were so thin that we could not get to them. We stayed there some 30 minutes, during which time some of our guns got choked with burning powder, and when we would exchange them for others lying around. Also in this area we have Captain Robert Ward, 33rd Alabama. He is wounded in the right hip by a minie ball. He is going to die here later on. He is about 30 or 35 yards in front of the second line. So he's up in this area too. And he is pretty close, they say about 30 to 40 paces to the right of where Major Gaylor was killed. So up in this general area somewhere is where Gaylor was hit. They're going to hold this position for a while. Some say about 30 minutes, some sources say about an hour, until the circumstances here force them to retreat. And the reason is that fresh brigade that's coming up, Gooding's Brigade, is going to give them a little bit more than they can handle. By this point, I mean, the amount that they have marched to get here, I mean, Gooding's men, I mean, they rushed to get over here too, going cross country. But I mean, the brigade has been fighting. They've been moving constantly up and down this terrain, and us just walking up and down that area gets to you. Moving quickly while you're being shot at and carrying all that extra stuff is going to wear you out. And so by the time they get up here, they're just really not much of a match for Gooding's brigade. So, like we said earlier, General McCook said that this place is hard pressed. The artillery fire from up here is just a little too much, and they start to fall back. But while they are here, we talked about earlier that 32nd Mississippi's on the left, 33rd Alabama's on the right. It's mostly those two regiments moving together. But the 45th Mississippi, the small regiment, seems to have been on the right, and by the time it gets up here, Private Cannon, who is in that regiment, says they must not have been very numerous at all by this point, because the fire from the 98th Ohio and Gooding's Brigade, he says the regiment looked like a skirmish line by this point. So, I mean, they're whittled down to absolutely nothing, and it's not going to take much for them to get pushed offline. So he says, casually glancing to the right, hardly a respectable skirmish line could I see. To the left, it was the same. The query naturally suggested itself. Are they all killed? If not, what has become of them? Turning my face to the rear, it was explained. Those who were able to run were scattered for 300 yards back, every fellow taking care of himself. So that regiment breaks, and they just take off back that direction. If you're running away, got a big old hill you got to go over. And like we mentioned yesterday, when the 42nd Indiana was coming out of the creek and they had to go up those heights, those guys were getting hit, you know, and they're pretty easy targets. And he talks about that here. So those who were able to run were scattered, every fellow taking care of himself. I didn't claim to be any braver than the rest, and no doubt would have been with them, with the biggest crowd, before the fact that my attention was riveted on the bluecoats in front and so occupied with pulling up the steep hill that I had not observed what was taking place on my flanks. When I found I was almost or quite alone, I lit out in short order. And my recollection is not exactly clear as to how I got out of there, but it is presumable that I struck the ground occasionally in high places. At any rate, I reached the bottom of the hill in 1/20th part of the time it required to cover the same distance on the advance. When I got into the field, it seemed every Yankee within a mile concentrated their guns directly on me, and the weeds were cut off all around and under me. But somehow, I escaped without a scratch. I took cover behind the first hill that offered protection from the rain of bullets where a few other stragglers had stopped. I had hardly time to catch my breath before a most thrilling and welcome sight was presented. A line of gray a mile long, one of Polk's divisions coming to reinforce us. So that would have been some of Donaldson's men over there, but he probably actually means Liddell's coming up, who is not part of Polk's division though. So after the regiments of the 45th fall back, the Union fire is going to focus their effort now on the 33rd Alabama, they're hitting their flank now. And the 33rd Alabama is going to start to refuse their flank going backwards. The 32nd Mississippi is still facing this way, and so it's almost starting to do that. And they keep backing up, and so they're almost in the middle of the back of that regiment, which isn't going to be a great thing either. So it's a perpendicular line after a few minutes. So Preston in 33rd Alabama wrote this. He said, "We have no men on our right. They inflated us from the right, while the line behind the fence in front seemed determined to stay. Then the Federals got to advancing around the right of the 33rd Alabama." So someone's coming up around that area over there, where it had no support and doubling its back in the rear of its left, the regiment pivoting on the right of 32nd Mississippi, near where Major Gaylor was standing over a wounded officer when killed a little later. And Captain Robert Ward had been wounded and fell about 50 feet to the right in line with Gaylor and some blah, blah. Colonel Sam Adams had been wounded in the foot. Lieutenant Colonel Crittenden ordered the left of the regiment to drop back some, the right being then quite 45 degrees in rear of the right of the 32nd Mississippi. In falling back, the entire regiment dropped back some, but Colonel Crittenden halted us where we squatted on our knees, loading and firing for a short time in the valley or depression to the right and rear of the right company 32nd Mississippi. So down in here, these guys are in line going down, they're on their knees, loading and firing in that direction. But when the 32nd Mississippi gave way and all ran up the slope and about the time we were passing, I lost my spot. Okay, so what ends up happening here, as Gooding's Break comes up, the 22nd Indiana launches a bayonet attack right at the 32nd Mississippi and breaks their line. And so one regiment is facing this direction, and the regiment they're backed up on gets hit hard, and they just break and they run. And it is going to cause the 33rd Alabama to break and run too. So you've got now two regiments that are all mingled up, mixed in together. They're just throwing back that way. And Gooding's brigade is going to come up and take up a line right up here along the road, on that side of the road, because Daryl, isn't this where they found all those dropped mini balls?
Yeah, all through here.
Yeah. So they're up in this area and they halt here. Some maps will show them all the way up in here, Gooding's brigade, but they're probably not, probably back over here. The 22nd Indiana does charge them away, but they get brought back up. And then Gooding moves them from the right of the brigade over to the left side of the brigade, where the really bad thing happens to them. So as the remnants of this brigade is moving back, they are met by Liddell's brigade as his Arkansas men as they're coming up. These men are quite well. They saw fighting earlier in that morning, but Liddell said as he sees all these stragglers over there, he says, when we pressed forward in line to the work before us, we met crowds of stragglers flying towards the rear. A young officer in violent language and manner wildly called on his men to halt and return to the fight. Having rallied the company, he requested permission to join my command. Recognizing his gallantry, I granted the permission. So this may have been the small group of men that a Lieutenant Andrews is able to get back together, because Private Cannon of the 45th Mississippi recalled that he says, we immediately began to rally the stragglers, and when Polk's, actually probably Liddell's, line reached us, we had 13 men of the 2 Alabama companies of the 45th Mississippi under Lieutenant Andrews, and falling in with them, moved forward again. So for the vast majority of the brigade, except for these men, the battle is pretty much over for them. There are no casualty accounts for the brigade. If you get into some of the Alabama newspapers, you can start adding some stuff in, but it's not all together. You can tell it's not the full thing, because they only got a few companies listed. 33rd Alabama actually has a pretty terrible train accident on the way back from Knoxville to Chattanooga, and they lose a lot more men in that. And so it's like, how many guys actually died here at Perryville and were lost here? You get some of them, because they say a lot of these men who were initially wounded here, they end up dying here at Perryville. And I see a whole lot more of that than I do actually killed on the battlefield. The amount of men that died just later on. If you get a chance to read Stuart Sanders' book about the aftermath of Perryville, that really opens your eyes to the situation here, and it was absolutely awful. So, but as Liddell comes up here, and this is what we covered last year, so kind of in opposite order, it's dark by that point. And so as Liddell moves up, it's too dark to see who's in front, and they start shooting, but someone starts yelling out, you're shooting at your own men. And Polk rides up, and he's like, why aren't you firing? He's like, I think we're firing on our own men. He's like, oh, I hope not. And so he's like, I'll go see. He rides up in there, and he's yelling at the Union soldiers who he thinks are Confederates, and he says, who are you? And some officer responds, I'm so-and-so of such and such Indiana Red. I think it's 22nd Indiana. 22nd Indiana. He's like, hold your fire, sir. And then he just rides off.
And who are you, sir?
Yeah.
And I'll show you who
I'll show you how, he smartly, answers that, just rides off real quickly before they can figure it out. And by the time he gets over there to Liddell, it's like, those are Yankees. And so they immediately open fire, and the distance between the 2 brigades is super small. And the 22nd Indiana just gets annihilated over in this particular area. That brigade just, with really one volley, just gets shattered and immediately falls back. And then Liddell moves forward back up to where Wood was earlier, captures McCook's wagons, gets his whiskey and a bunch of other stuff from that wagon, his personal things, and which I think McCook asked for later on, sends a letter. He's like, can I please have my stuff back? But, yeah. So, but if we are talking about casualties, it's estimated there's probably about 200 casualties in the brigade. Not really sure how big the brigade is at the opening of the fight. Probably about 41 killed, about 163 wounded. I'm assuming that these numbers are probably a little higher than what I've able to get from the various newspapers. So anyways, kind of like we talked about with Bushrod, the amount of casualties they take shows they did a whole lot more than what they're typically given credit for. So as we look through here, there's not really much of anything about Wood on it, really in any of these tablets. And so, they helped capture a battery. They made it all the way up here. They pushed Rousseau off his headquarters, and then they get torn up and eventually have to fall back. But I think it's because they have no brigade commander. All 3 of the regimental commanders get hit. So there's going to be a lack of reports and stuff from the officers that give us all the details that we can usually get with some of these other brigades that we just don't get this with here. But after this is all over, Wood does return to command, fights at Stones River. He is at Chickamauga. I'm going to say he fights it, but He resigns just before Missionary Ridge. There is some questionable behavior that he may have exhibited at Chickamauga. So I'll let you all look into that later. Lowry, though, he is going to last through almost the very end of the war. He is going to rejoin the Army in time for Stones River. He gets promoted to Brigadier General in 1863, becomes known as the Preacher General. And he is going to resign in March 1865 because of health reasons. Colonel Adams gets killed at Kennesaw Mountain. And that really just concludes our talk here on Woods Brigade. Sorry I marched you all over the whole park here, it seemed like. But got your steps in. About to get some more steps, I think, with Taylor here pretty soon. So the best way to get back where we were is follow that trail. If you want to hit some more hills, hit the roads, but you know, the trail is going to be the quickest
We all
point.
love history, right? That means we're all keepers of odd knowledge too. And that house burns down in 1962, 100 years afterward.
Wow.
What day? When? In 1962 does that house burn down? Does anybody know?
I think it was Halloween.
Okay. 'Cause I mean, did it make the 100th anniversary? Yeah.
Just barely.
The two trees that are over there definitely made the picture in 1927, so they're still there and grown up there.
Yeah, I mean, I really
But
wish that house
I
was
read
still
that and
there.
I said they don't have a date here.
Yeah.
It said 1962. They could have narrowed it a little bit.
There's still some Russell descendants here.
Okay, still.
Yeah, there's that picture of the kid. I don't know if y'all have ever seen it. The kid that's holding,
The bullets.
yeah, all those mini balls and musket balls, and I mean they were just digging those things up like crazy, and that would have been cool to be able to see.
Was
Yeah,
it one of the
Without
Russell
a-
boys that brought a skull in?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he said he found a skull out by one of the fence lines. He came back with it, showed it to his dad, and they went out, I think, and maybe reburied it.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Be a thing to find right there.
Just,
If my kids ever bring me a skull,
Alabama.
There's a huge mass grave and a monument.
in Cleveland.
Yeah, that's the little.
In Cleveland, there's.
They know the exact spot.
Uh-huh.
So, but yeah, the big mass grave there in the cemetery. So,
I mean, you have to be able to make it through this and then die in an accident.
Yeah.
All right.